So dynamic zone visibility is relatively new. It came out in version 2022.3, so that's a couple versions ago, but that hasn't really been that long. So I think the number of examples that people have are accumulating, the number of use cases people can think of are accumulating, and I wanted to share a little bit of the community's work in this area with you all, but then also actually walk you through 3 what I call practical uses of dynamic zone visibility. There are always kind of 2 schools of dashboarding, right? There's the blingy, showcasing, look at this amazing thing that Tableau can do and how pretty it looks that you see a lot in the Tableau public gallery. And then there's the kind of work that I mostly do, which are business dashboards for analysts or executives who, sure, they like a pretty looking dashboard, but we don't get to use the bling so much. So I'm more focusing on that type of work today, although dynamic zone visibility can be used in a lot of different ways. So Nicole just did a great introduction, so I'm not going to talk much about myself. I will just throw this up here since it's already there, and do just want to show you, since you all live in Atlanta and I'm coming to you from Wisconsin, this is a picture of my land. We have 40 acres just south of Madison, where we have a 6-acre vineyard. We're turning some of that into prairie. I'm really into conservation and also love to garden, and I love to play board games. So happy to chat about any of those topics any time, or more concisely, this little Venn diagram I put together. I have some unique hobby overlap, and maybe it's just me, but I find all of these things a lot of fun. But you didn't want to hear about me, you wanted to hear from me. So let's talk about dynamic zone visibility. So I have 4 examples from the community that I've picked out that I think are really good examples of this feature. I'm not going to do a deep dive into all of these. I think you all should go check these out on your own and learn from them, but I did just want to at least point some of them out. So for example, Sam Parsons has a great viz where he not only uses dynamic zone visibility, goodness, sorry, I had to switch some screens around here, not only uses dynamic zone visibility, but also has this great descriptive text on here about what is it doing for you. So he says, for example, that if you use the dynamic zone visibility in this upper left, you'll get additional details. So just as this one example, in the normal view, you see these bars, you see the high and low bars labeled, but no other labels. But if you zoom with dynamic zone visibility into this chart, suddenly this one chart takes up the entire dashboard, and now you see all of the labels. So that's a really great use of keeping it pretty clean and concise for the first view, but then providing those additional details for your users upon request, in this case, by zooming in. And he's got these other examples here too of how you can use the dynamic zoning. So definitely recommend checking this one out. I think Sam did a great job with it. Next example I wanted to show you is from Finn Charlton. So this one has some stock ticker information, these trend lines across the top, and then there's the trend line at the bottom as well. All stocks are included at first, but then if you hover over any of them, there's an action that shows you that stock's performance relative to the others. That's pretty cool, probably a standard parameter action. But look what happens if I actually click on any one of these. Suddenly I get 2 new charts at the bottom that pertain just to the stock that I've selected. So this is using dynamic zone visibility to give additional information, in this case in the form of these 2 charts, for the selection made. I can switch this to a different stock if I want to. Or if I click off of this, then I go back to the other view that we had at the beginning of just the trend lines. So again, a pretty cool way to give a user more details when they want to see them, or the big picture just by default. So that's a great example. And then just a couple more quick ones before we actually get into the demo of how to do this. So this one, Anathan Wongparain built a couple of different ways to look at survey data. And for each of these, there's the quick view, or I should say the condensed view of the chart. But if you click on these little arrows, then it will pop open more detail. So you get some text description of what is this type of chart, what are the pros and cons of using this chart type, what are maybe some alternative ways of presenting the same information. A really great example of how to use that dynamic zone visibility to bring forth some additional relevant information when a user says, hey, this is the one I really want to take a closer look at, and all in the same dashboard. They don't have to go out to some other dashboard and come back. They're staying in the same workspace, which is pretty cool. And then the last one, if you all get the emails from Playfair Data, which I do recommend, they have really great information in there. One of their more recent blog posts and newsletters was about using dynamic zone visibility on one of their NFL related dashboards. So the blog post actually walks through how they built this. So if you want more of a tutorial, you can go to that one. But then just to demo the functionality briefly, they have a couple of different dashboards here. This one called the reshuffling effect is the one that has the dynamic zone visibility I want to show you, if this will cooperate. There we go. So they took the opposite approach. So the three examples I just showed you were less detail and less you click into the dynamic zone visibility. This one starts with these annotations, these notes about how do I read this chart? What am I looking at? What should I be doing here? That shows by default. And then once the user has made a selection, so I'm going to pick a team here, then those notes go away. And this additional viz shows up on the side that gives you a more detailed trend for that selected team, a little bit of text about it, some statistics. And then when you close that, that chart goes away and those annotations pop back out again. So hopefully you're getting the sense of just how seamless and smooth this works from the user's perspective, that you can have all these additional pieces of information, additional charts, whatever you want. And the user just clicks on things and it shows and it hides and it looks really clean and elegant. I like it a lot. But let's talk about those practical uses that I mentioned earlier. Oops, I just clicked in the, clicked right in the slide. Here we go. So in order to have dynamic zone visibility, there are a couple of conditions that need to be met. Specifically these three. This comes directly from the Tableau knowledge base or the help manual that you would look at online. That link is right here. Mark Reed also did a blog about this that goes into more detail. He's got several examples of calculations that work and some that don't, and some use cases. I highly recommend reading that too if you're looking for more information. But basically what you need to know is that in order to trigger the dynamic zone visibility, you've got to use either a calculation or a parameter that is Boolean, that is single value. And honestly, to me, those seem redundant, but we'll just roll with it. And three is independent of the viz. So it can't be something where the user clicks on a chart and that triggers the dynamic zone visibility because of the data value that's in there. Maybe they'll get there someday, but currently that's not how dynamic zone visibility works. It's got to be a result that Tableau knows what the answer is at all times, and it's got to be Boolean. So this will make a little more sense when I show you the specific examples I have here. So example number one, practical uses for dynamic zone visibility. I'm calling this user's choice. So the examples I showed you earlier were about showing you one or two additional charts based on something that the user clicked on. But I had a situation recently where I was building dashboards for a client, and we already had, I think, 12 dashboards in the series. So adding more was really not what we wanted to do. That would be a little bit too much. But we also had a couple of different ways that our customers wanted to be able to see the data. And so I used dynamic zone visibility to give them the ability to choose which way they wanted to see the data. So on this dashboard, I had basically three completely different sets of visuals. So this is set one or set two, which looks really similar, but is actually a different way of looking at the data, or set three. And all the user had to do to toggle between these was interact with this drop-down parameter. And depending on what they chose, they would get the information, or I should say the visualizations based on their selection. So I want to show you that example here in Tableau. So I have a workbook with a dashboard already started. So I've got section one, our profit. We've got section two on quantity. So let's say I did want to bring in a third one here. So what I would probably do is just go ahead and bring out an additional container in here. I'm going to just put my two sheets in. I want this one on top, this one below it. I think I got, there we go, bring that one below it. I'm going to borrow this title. Not sure if you all have realized with the copying dashboard item. So I thought I copied that item. Oh, okay. Then Control V to paste that onto my dashboard. And then I'm using Shift and dragging this into my container. So I don't have to make a new text box to have this title. I can just borrow the one I already had. So we'll call this one sales. And we'll just hide that real quick. Okay. Don't need this either. So now in order to let my user actually choose which one of these, I'm going to need a parameter to do that. So I'm going to go into one of these sheets and we're just going to make a very basic parameter and we'll call it user choice, just to stick with my example here. User choice, and I'm going to make these string to keep that simple. And I'm only going to give them my three choices. So we're going to have quantity, we're going to have sales, and we're going to have profit. All right, parameter, step one. Now, this isn't Boolean, right? There were 3 choices there. So in order to be able to use this for dynamic zone visibility, I have to turn this into something Boolean. So now I'm going to reference this parameter in a calculated field, and I'm going to make 3 versions of this and have dynamic zone visibility is quantity, let's abbreviate it for time, equals quantity. So now this is either true or false. Either my parameter value is equal to quantity or it isn't. So now this will be a field that Tableau can use for dynamic zone visibility. So I've got that one, and then I would just duplicate this, edit it to turn this into profit, turn this into profit, and then we would do the same thing for sales. I'll just skip that one for now, just so we can move on with our example here. So then back on my dashboard, I need to make that parameter available to my user. So we'll pull out my user choice parameter here, stick a title on there. I'm going to float this up in the top so I can get rid of this container. Okay, so now the magic part, right? We've got our parameter, we've got our calculations, but I need to tell Tableau what I want it to do when the parameter choice is switched. So then I would do one container at a time. So that's the other cool thing about dynamic zone visibility is you can use it on basically anything on the dashboard. It can be a sheet, it can be a text box, it can be an image, it can be a button, it can be the whole container. And where you find turning that on is over here in this layout tab. So we've got this new feature here as of 2022.3 of control visibility using value. So if you've set up your calculations correctly or your parameter correctly, you should see that option in here when you pick your data source, and there it is. So here's my dynamic zone visibility quantity. So nothing happened because my parameter is already set to that. But look what happens when I do the same thing for profit. Profit disappears because my parameter is not showing profit. So profit's not there anymore. So then if I switch that to profit, profit comes back and quantity disappears. And if I were fully building this out, I would have added the sales as well, and that one would disappear, and then we'd be down to just the one. And so that's how you can give users complete control over what set of content they see based on the choice that they make. User's choice. Pretty cool. My second example, I call opposite measures. I'm sure many of you have faced this as well, where you're doing a measure swap. So you want your user to be able to choose from a couple of different measures to look at. Maybe it's in a map or a heat map or something like that. So here's an example of one I built for my clients. We have this map, actually of Georgia, and we had a couple of different measures for them to choose from, and it would update to show that measure in the map with its legend and so on. Well, the problem we had was that some of these measures, a high value was a good thing. So this was looking at arts enrollment, and having more students in the arts is good, having more students is good, but having schools or students who don't have the arts is bad. And it was a complicated workaround initially when I first built this to have to be able to show, to indicate that the value was good or bad when they're all swapping in the same map. And I needed my tooltip to update. I wanted my graph to update. With dynamic zone visibility, this becomes incredibly easy. So I have instructions here written out just so that you all can refer back to this later, but I'm going to show it to you live here with my workbook. So I have a very, very, very simple dashboard with just this heat map. I've got these fake schools here. I've got my parameter to select my different measures. So same thing here, where the first several are all where a high value is a good thing, a low value is a bad thing. And then I want to be able to show this swap. So you've probably already guessed where this is going. All I need to do is take my initial worksheet where I've got my heat map and I've got my measure, and I just need to duplicate this. So duplicate the sheet. And then all I have to do is reverse my color legend. So right now, blue is on the right. High values are blue, lower values are red. I reverse that. Now blue is on the left. And now I have 2 copies of my sheet, one reversed, one not. I also need to have my, I already have my parameter, sorry, for the different measure swaps. So there's all my 7 different measures. My positive ones are at the top, my negative ones at the bottom. They don't need to be sorted that way, but it'll just make it easier for the calculation. And then the last piece is I still need that Boolean calculation in order for Tableau to know which zone to show at which time. So for that one, I just have 2 calculations. I've got one here, heat map legend. So since I put those in order with the ones I want to be reversed at the end, I can just say if my parameter value is less than 6, then that's one of my calculations. Oh, sorry, I should have said that my parameter is set up to be numeric just because I didn't want to type out all of those labels. So my values are 1 through 7. My labels are string. That was probably a touch confusing. Sorry about that. And then my other calc is just the reverse of that. Instead of it being less than 6, if my parameter is 6 or 7, I could have done greater than or equal to 6. It would have worked the same way, but I just spelled each of these out. Then I want the reverse. And so I have those two. And then when I go to my dashboard, I did the same thing where I made a container. I put my heat map and its a corresponding legend in a container. I did the same thing for the other heat map and its container. And then I go to the dynamic zone visibility, option the layout. And for the one I wanted high values to be blue, they get that calculation. And then for the other one where I wanted high values to be red, that container gets the other calculation, the reversed version. Whoops, there we go. Heat map legend reversed. And so then when the user interacts with a one parameter, it doesn't look any different to them in the sense that they don't see that the whole dashboard is changing, but they're being served up a different heat map and a different legend that now corresponds to the measure they've selected. My tooltips match what they've selected. Easy peasy and much less confusing for the user and a lot less development for me. So I love that tip, and I encourage you, if you find yourself in that situation where your measures swap, but your measures aren't all in the same direction, this can be an easy way to solve that. All right, and finally, my third example for you, data notifications. So I wish I could tell you that you can use dynamic zone visibility to pop up an alert if somebody has, let's say, filtered out their data to the point where there's nothing left and there's no data to show. However, that violates that third rule or third criteria of dynamic zone visibility, where it can't be dependent on the data in the view. So for now, that use case is out. However, you can still put notifications that are based on some, I guess, constant in your data. So for example, my demo here today is imagine a scenario where you have data coming out of your warehouse and it loads for a new month on the first of the month, but maybe you're not entirely confident in your processes yet, and you're not sure if your data has fully loaded on the first of the month, or maybe you know that there's a manual process involved and not everybody might have their data in yet, something like that. So what you can do is build a use dynamic zone visibility to show dynamically a message or not, depending on what day it is. So back to my workbook here, I've got this basic dashboard, monitoring some sales, looking at some trends over time, very cool. But let's say that on the first of every month, I want to warn people that, hey, I'm giving you the data, but let's not quite trust it yet. Things are still a little bit in flux. So what I have for that is just a calculation. That's the text, sorry. I have a calculation that just says, is today, it's a date part calculation, is today the first of the month? Yes or no? So that's a constant, right? Tableau can check for today and it's true or false. Is it yes? Is it no? Sorry, constant's not really the right word there, but Tableau can know what value I'm looking for. It's not dependent on what's in the view. Today is either the first or it's not. Now, since it wasn't today's not the first, you didn't see that note in the dashboard. So let's go ahead and change this to the 15th, which is today. And now if I go back to my dashboard, whoa, hey, look at that. A nice helpful notice that reminds me that the systems haven't finished loading. Let's be a little cautious with our data. Tomorrow, when it's not the 15th anymore, that note will go away again. So it's a nice way to give people some sort of alert or warning or notification about your data if you know ahead of time what day to be cautious of. Or another example of this might be if your data source should have data on every day of the month, and you check against the max date in your data, the max of your entire data set, and it's not the same as the last day of the previous month, then you know there's a problem. You could show an alert in that case as well. So you can probably think of a lot of different ways you could use the same technique to show some sort of warnings, and hopefully Tableau will expand their uses of dynamic zone visibility in the future to be able to let us do alerts based on the data itself. So I didn't point this out. It's the exact same technique where I've got this one this one worksheet with my message on it, and I'm controlling just this sheet with dynamic zone visibility with that calculation. Is the day of today the first, or now I've changed it to the 15th, yes or no? Show it if it is, don't show it if it isn't. And there you have it. 3 hopefully practical use cases for using dynamic zone visibility, or there's the cool blingy stuff too. I definitely really appreciate when people can use Tableau in a lot of creative ways. But like I said, I build a lot of business dashboards, so I wanted to give you some examples from that type of work. I want to finish up my presentation with just a couple of, I guess, the benefits of dynamic zone visibility, why you might want to do this, as if the cool factor wasn't enough, but also some cautions. There are a few things to be aware of. So back in my presentation here, we just did the alerts. Here's some more examples I will include in this deck that you all can check out later. Mark Reed, in addition to that blog post I mentioned earlier, also did a video on YouTube, which is a really great tutorial. It's very thorough on how to set up dynamic zone visibility. And he also uses other great Tableau features like set actions and parameter actions. So it's a really good, just general tutorial, as well as being focused on dynamic zone visibility. Highly recommend that one. You see some of the really creative ways that people are using it. So this one switches the background coloring to be dark versus light. Lindsay's got some filters that either appear or don't, depending on a selection. Luke has a pop-out table, and here's another tutorial. So lots of different ways that people have used it. I encourage you to check those out if you're curious. But let's get to the benefits here. So my favorite, besides the cool factor, is that you don't have to have a new sheet title. So if you've ever done the old school way of sheet swapping, where you've got things in a container together, and based on usually a parameter value or calculation, one of them shows and the other gets hidden, and then it works very similar to dynamic zone visibility. The problem is if your title of that sheet that you're trying to hide is still visible, the sheet doesn't fully collapse, doesn't fully go away. So what you end up having to do is hide all of your titles of your real sheets and put this additional title up above that container to describe what people are looking at. Well, you don't have to worry about that with dynamic zone visibility, because the whole sheet goes away. And so you can leave your title on it. And when that sheet is shown again, it's there. When it's not, it isn't. No more fake sheet titles. Love that. Other thing that's really helpful for those of you who really care, or maybe your quality assurance reviewers care, or your supervisor cares, whoever, some people who are really concerned about everything aligning perfectly and that pixel perfect alignment. When you do that sheet swapping where you have things sharing a container, the hidden items do take up a little bit of space. And the more things that you have that are being hidden or swapped out, the more that space is. Well, in this technique, you don't have that extra bulk. Those hidden sheets are just not there. They're not on the dashboard, or at least they're not being rendered. And so everything aligns perfectly. And then third, depending on how you set things up, there may be a little bit less work for you involved in this than traditional sheet swapping, but it really just depends on your setup. How many calcs do you have to make? How many zones are you hiding? How many are you hiding simultaneously? So that's a maybe, but it can be a little less work for you. But now, unfortunately, the cautions. So this first one, adding more content to containers when you've got dynamic zone visibility enabled. Oh, I can't even tell you how much I've struggled with this recently. I have a dashboard I'm building for a client where I've got, I think, 8 or 9 containers that I'm hiding using a parameter. And woe is you if you've started building it, started using dynamic zone visibility, and realize, oops, I need to put this sheet in one of my containers. No, Tableau is having none of that. It seems to get incredibly confused because you've got these containers that are there but not showing, and you've got a container that is showing. And when you try to drag a new object into a container, it gets really confused and it's a problem. So if you can figure out your layout in advance, get all your containers built, get all your content in them, then strategically hide things as you go along, you won't have this problem. Also, I've had a little bit of success with floating something off to the side temporarily and then bringing it back in. But I just want to warn you, it's fidgety, it's fussy, it's even worse than containers have always been. So don't want to discourage you from using it, but just prepare you that that part can be a little tricky. The second one, this one bit me a little bit, and thanks to the Tableau doctors at Tableau Conference for helping me figure out what was happening. I had a sheet that was a map that was then filtering other sheets, a standard filtering action. Well, I was also dynamically hiding different maps. And the problem is when you hide a map, it doesn't wipe the actions that were based on that sheet like it would if you were sheet swapping. Because the sheet is still there on the dashboard, those actions were preserving. My selections weren't getting wiped out. So my other graphs were still showing what had been chosen from map A, even though I'm now showing map B. So just to warn you, dynamic zone visibility doesn't clear out dashboard actions. Third one, if you choose that option to have Tableau tidy up your workbook for you and hide your unused fields, it doesn't seem to recognize the calculations that you used to enable dynamic zone visibility. So all the ones you saw me use to show this or not, it'll hide those. And then your dynamic zones don't work. And so I would be a little careful using that hiding unused fields. Either bring your dynamic zone calcs back or save that for the end. Build those in the end after you've hidden things. Fourth one, general advice. If you're replacing a data source, it can get a little wonky. So make sure you check everything over and that it picked up your dynamic zone calculations correctly, and that your dynamic zone is still, your calculations are still applied. Just a little, I've had a little bit of trouble with that, so just want to warn you. And then the bottom one, possibly the biggest problem of all, at least as of a few weeks ago, and I can't find any indication that they have resolved this. It turns out that if you have scheduled extract refreshes on your data in Tableau server, those will not run if your dashboard or your workbook also has dynamic zone visibility. Tableau is aware of the issue. Hopefully they're working on it. I did check the resolved list earlier today, and it still doesn't appear that it's been fixed. So definitely want you to be aware that that might be a problem for you. You might need to wait on using dynamic zone visibility until they have addressed this issue. But on the whole, great feature, lots of great use cases that the community keeps coming up with new and more. Tableau Tim's got a great video out there on this, lots of resources out there for you to learn more. But hopefully I've inspired you a little bit to think about some ways you can use this feature in your work. It is really great. And with that, I will finish up and take a few questions if you have any. Also happy to connect with anybody about animals, wine, board gaming, or Tableau. Your choice.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll have to connect on board gaming as well.
Yes.
Love it. I know in the Q&A, Sarah Carr asked if there were blog posts or books, something that's not a video on dynamic zone visibility. Do you have any off the top? Otherwise, I will go look for Sarah's.
Yeah, the two I would definitely recommend. So Tableau Tim has a couple of them. One was basically how to do it, and they followed up with a second one that was, how does this affect performance? So Tableau Tim, you've probably heard of him, British guy, got lots of videos, really great work. And then I mentioned Mark Reed's video earlier. So that one is actually in my deck. I'll share this with you all. His was a thorough walkthrough as well, really helpful, guided you on how to use this, both how do you build it, but then also when does it make sense to use it?
Thank you so much for presenting on this. I have not had a chance to play with dynamic zone visibility, and everyone keeps like talking about how amazing it is, and I couldn't figure out how to communicate that to my team because I didn't really know what it was. So this has been so helpful and wonderful. If anyone watched IronViz as well at conference, they use dynamic zone visibility in the IronViz as well. Just so many ways to use it at work. And that's what I love about some of the new features in Tableau. My favorite ones are the ones that you can do like your really fun, snazzy public vizzes, but I can also use it in my job, and like just getting both worlds is the best.
Yes, and I would say this feature definitely qualifies in that category.
Yes.
Yeah, you're welcome.